Hey everybody, it's Amanda. Did you forget who you were? It's Rick.
Right. And Rick.
It's time for the evening Bible study. Give me just a minute to share the links, and we'll get started here in a few minutes.
I'm so sorry. I'm exhausted.
I tried to get him to come on earlier.
I'm trying. I'm gonna wake up. Usually when I start talking, trying to keep them eyes open.
I had a nap. I'll still probably yawn.
Oh! You said nap, and I started yawning. Oh my goodness!
Oh my goodness! They don't want to keep hearing that. You're yelling it right into the mic.
Sorry.
It's gonna get better.
Oh, it's fine.
Just give it a moment.
This is a live event. It's like we're sitting around the dining room table.
That's right.
Talking about the Bible. Mm-hmm. This is not a pretty edited video. You know that you don't come on for that. You like it to be real and raw.
Rick is real and raw.
Real and raw, yeah. Those are our internet names.
Who's who?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know.
It's like, am I real or raw?
Yeah. Welcome to Real and Raw.
All right. We are really and raw in Romans 13. Romans 13 tonight, everybody. We finished Romans 12 yesterday. Actually, Romans 13 is really a continuation of Romans 12 because we had the first part of Romans. He was really talking about the differences between law and grace. Mm-hmm. And once he established the need for faith and the need for a believer let me rephrase that. The need for faith and the fact that the law is good, and then the reasonableness of us following it as a living sacrifice. So that's where we get to in chapter 12. He starts explaining how we ought to live. Mm-hmm. We as believers. Of course, he's talking to the believers then, but it's relevant to us. That's why God has it in his word. Kelly says Amanda is real. Rick must be raw. I agree with that. I think that's how it is. So Romans 13 is the next thing that as believers, if we're going to be a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, this is the next thing the next things, I should say, that he's yawning.
Excuse me. I'm so sorry.
That we should be doing as believers. And tonight we're going to be talking about following leadership. And we're only going to we already agreed, Rick and I, we're only going to do 7 verses tonight. That's our goal. And
that had nothing to do with my yawning.
No.
In fact, when we agreed on 7,
I was probably still going to take an hour.
Well, yeah, I know. When we agreed on 7, I had not yawned yet.
Drink some coffee, man.
I know. I am sorry.
Yeah, you're yawning all the way through the. I haven't even read the verses yet. It's been 3 minutes.
Chewing some grounds. Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Have you shared the links?
I have. I'm going to just read it. I'm going to read the first 7 verses, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Obedience to leadership that the Lord's put in your life. Mm-hmm. And this is just one of those challenging parts of being a Christian. So anyway, all right, let's read it. Romans chapter 13, starting at verse 1, it says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. So it is about submission to authorities. He yawned again.
Yeah.
All right. So
I'm working on it.
Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. First verse out of the box hit you hard. First of all, every soul, every person has to be subject in obedience to higher powers, any kind of authority. That covers a lot of different people. That's your governmental authority. That's leadership within your church body or any other organization that you put yourself within. If there's leadership, you should be following them. That's within the home. Obviously, there are other verses that talk about the leadership in the home. Children should be obedient to their parents. Wives are supposed to be in submission to their husbands. There's many levels I'm just barely covering. But the idea is that if you have a leader, there's no question that you should be following them. And the reason why is that the Lord has put them there. It says there's no power but of God, and the powers that be ordained of God. The Lord put them there, and so you should be prepared to be obedient to them. So I'm gonna let you talk about it. We'll probably talk about it back and forth here for a minute, but if you talk, you won't yawn so much.
That's my thought. Let's see. All right. When everything's going good, when everything seems to be working very peaceful-like, perhaps you can go into a group and read a couple of these verses, and people won't go, but, wait a second, but wait a here. But when everything's going rough, or a little tension, then no doubt people are saying in their heart, but. You follow what I'm saying? There seems to be
vaguely.
My point is that
Kelly already has one. What about our founding fathers and the British? Go ahead.
Well, she went back a ways.
Yeah.
I was more thinking of just now in 2021. I mean, let's just address the elephant in the room. The government seems to be going in a way that is a little questionable
to some people,
and to some people, to others they're right on the money, but to some they're questionable, and the question will come up: well, am I supposed to follow them? And according to this verse,
yes,
and we'll talk more about this as we go on. But I'll say it from the get-go that we are not to follow man if man is leading us to sin against the Bible.
Correct. If you go against God's word, you're not supposed to do that.
Because we're supposed to serve God rather than man.
Correct.
But as long as man is governing in such a way that they are not expecting us to disobey God, directly, then the Lord expects us to follow, to obey.
Yes.
The Lord is a God of order, and the Lord established government for a purpose.
Not just government, any leadership, because it's
leadership. Exactly. Like you even brought up leadership in the home. There's leadership in the church. Leadership anywhere you go. There's someone's got to be in charge.
Correct. And you're not going to agree with them.
Exactly. And so I think that's just a point to bring up immediately, that the Lord has, I said government to begin with, but I like what you said. The Lord has established leadership.
Yeah. Well, if I may.
You may.
Being a woman.
Yes.
Having been questioned many times about a woman's role within the home and being submission to her husband, which the Bible talks about, many times. The whole idea is that people, like you were saying, they always are looking for exceptions to the rule.
Mm-hmm.
It's always what everyone is interested in. They only care about the exceptions. And there are exceptions. There's no question about that, like you just mentioned. But the majority of the time, you can be in obedience to your leadership, and it's not going to go against God's word. So like a lot of times when I talk to wives about submission, the first thing they'll say is, well, what if my husband wants me to murder someone? Okay. Well, obviously you wouldn't do that. Obviously that goes against God's word, but your husband is most likely not going to ask you to do that. What he's going to ask you to do is, hey, can you get the house vacuumed today?
Mm-hmm.
In which case it would be like, okay, you should vacuum the house,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have to be offended by it. It doesn't go against God's word. He's just trying to make sure things are getting done. It's something that's bothering him. For whatever reason, he's not able to do it. So he's asking you if you would do it. And you don't have to get all up in arms about it. You're supposed to be a team working together, and he's the leader, and he's just trying to manage and make sure things are getting done. So, but the problem is nobody wants to be told what to do. That's the flesh, right? Nobody wants to be told what to do. So it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you will find a reason. Well, I didn't like his attitude when he asked me. Well, the Bible doesn't say, but if he's got an attitude, you don't have to listen to him.
Yeah.
You know, it just says that you have to be subject.
Yeah. There's a lot of responsibility on leadership. Mm-hmm. Before it's even brought up. God expects leaders to lead in a godly way.
Mm-hmm.
He does. Mm-hmm. But people who are being led are also expect to be led in a godly way. Mm-hmm. And we expect a lot of our leaders, but we don't expect much of us, I think, many times. Mm-hmm. And another thought is that many times no one wants to lead until someone steps up to lead. And then everybody's got an opinion on how they're leading. Yeah. So anyway, you can continue.
Well, no, I think you have to establish from the get-go here that God says very plainly that if you have leadership, you should be in obedience to them. Mm-hmm. Period. So, you know, I don't want to. Y'all, everybody, of course, has politics on their mind, and they think about the government and stuff. And so, last year we actually went over these verses when the COVID situation started, and one of the things we talked about was mask mandates. And I'm not going over. This is the only thing that I'm going to say that's mildly related to things that are happening now. But one of the things that we said last year, and I still think it's true this year, is that someone asking you to wear a mask does not go against God's word. It just doesn't.
No, is it aggravating? Mm-hmm. Perhaps. But is it sin?
No,
it's not.
So there's no reason biblically to go against that. Now, there are other things. I see you asking other questions. You have to determine for yourself whether or not that would go against God's word. But be reasonable. I mean, you can't just, this is what I said. Somebody would say if their husband tells them to do something and like, well, I don't like his attitude, and I think underneath it, he's trying to do this. No, the question is, what is he actually telling you to do? And if it is something that goes against God's word, or even is questionable about going against God's word, then I would definitely pause on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pray about it. Feel certain about it. Mm-hmm. And once you feel certain about it, then you can, go forward in that measure. Mm-hmm. But determine that for yourself. But the whole thing about the mask, I don't see anything about that in God's word. That doesn't do anything that's going to harm anyone. You know what I mean? So, I guess before we go much further, we could talk about the examples that we had in Daniel. Do you want to do that? Okay. So, we were talking about this.
I will say first about the whole, mandates and everything. Mm-hmm. You said look in God's word and decide for yourself and really pray about it. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that 100%. Mm-hmm. I will say this though. Mm-hmm. One thing that I am certain of is that the Lord has made me a steward over my own body.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to ask him for discernment and wisdom, really, to make good decisions for my body. And children too, your children. So it is something to be researched and studied out. What are the best things that we should be putting into our body, and things that are questionable. Like I said, we need discernment from the Lord. So I'm not saying for anyone to yay or nay, yes or no on the issue of the vaccine, but I am saying that it does require more prayer than I think people are putting into it, and really some real discernment from the Lord. So, because again, we are stewards of our own body. So that's what I'll say about that. Your examples of Daniel that you brought up to me earlier are very good ones, and I think that'll give us a better picture of how we should respond to government, or people in authority, I should say.
Well, when you say be subject to higher powers, people, like you said, will immediately ask about exceptions. So let's just cover the exceptions. Let's just talk about it beforehand. And once we establish how to deal with the exceptions and the consequences of that, then we can go back to what Romans is saying and talk about the 99% of the time when it is not an exception, because the majority of the time it's not going to be an exception. So I think the book of Daniel has so many good examples of it. But particularly I thought of the two. And one was the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I don't know if you know this in Daniel chapter 3. And basically what Nebuchadnezzar decided that he had set up an image of gold. And he wanted the people to worship it.
Yeah, like the golden calf from Exodus. But it was an image of himself. So.
And everyone else bowed down to that image. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to do so. And they dealt with it as respectfully as they could, but they would not do it because the Lord, they felt it was specifically against God's word, right? And so verse 16, this is important. Verse 16 is where they're addressing, Daniel chapter 3, by the way, verse 16, they're addressing Nebuchadnezzar. And it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. And now keep in mind, what they were going against was a very specific law of God, right? The very specific law where he said, we went over it in Leviticus, Deuteronomy multiple times. Don't make an image. Don't worship an image, right? You guys remember that? So this is a very specific, definite against God's word. And because they were certain of it, they were willing to even die for it. And they addressed the king respectfully. And they said, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not, careless in this. We have thought about it, and we know that God is able to deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we will not do it because it goes against him. And so they knew that they were facing death. And it may be that there comes a time that you have to make a choice that is actually that hard, that you have to say, I am choosing to suffer rather, I'm choosing to follow the Lord and suffer rather than follow what some other authority is telling me to do. That may be the case. And they did face the fiery furnace, and the Lord did actually deliver them. However, they understood that that wasn't necessarily the case, that the Lord wasn't necessarily going to save them. So that's one example where the leadership was telling them to do something, and they refused to do it because it went against God's word.
And it does happen even today in other countries
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. I mean, you can research